widely recognized credential in early childhood education, as well as a key stepping stone on the path to career advancement in ECE. Our essential for working with young children is the leading textbook for ECE professionals, CDA instructors, and parents of children ages birth to 5. The Essentials textbook has the expertise and resources to help you successfully educate young children, understand each stage of development, and prepare them to be kindergarten ready. It is full of helpful research, real-life scenarios, diagrams, and forms to guide your interactions with young children. Last month, we announced the release of the new 3rd edition of the Essentials textbook, which includes key content updates to better reflect and meet the needs of young children following the pandemic. While equity has been the essence of Essentials since its first release in 1991, we have taken a deeper dive in this new edition to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion within early childhood education. As the ECE field continues to evolve, we have broadened our discussion on the best ways to help early educators, young children, and families succeed. On this episode of CounciLIVE, you will hear from Dr. Shantel Meek, Executive Director and Professor of Practice for the Children's Equity Project, and Dr. Calvin E. Morgan, Chief Executive Officer for the Council for Professional Recognition. I'm excited to welcome our first guest, Dr. Shantel Meek. Dr. Meek played a pivotal role in the development of the new Essentials textbook, offering expertise and guidance to ensure equity and inclusion was at the heart of every competency standard. Today, Dr. Meek will share her experience working with the Council on the new 3rd edition and discuss the importance of equity as a content strategy piece for other organizations. Welcome, Dr. Meek.
So much. Great to be with you.
Thank you for being here. So, to get started, some of our viewers may not be familiar with the Children's Equity Project. What is the mission of the organization, and how are you all serving early childhood education?
Yeah, thanks for that question. So the Children's Equity Project is a center that is housed at Arizona State University, but we operate as a network across 15 other universities and organizations across the country. And we're a bunch of researchers and advocates and practitioners and other folks who are all interested and have the common mission of advancing equity across all the systems as an organization. We do the majority of our work in early care and education settings. We really do work on adjacent systems from early care and education that deeply affect the lives of children and families. We work across research, policy, and practice, but policy is really at the heart of what we do. And all of that work is kind of geared toward equity. It's toward identifying where racism and other forms of oppression exist and how they manifest across different systems, and identifying policy solutions, practice solutions, and answering questions that we still don't know about using research.
Awesome. Thank you for that overview. I'm sure that was really helpful for some of our viewers. You know, equity is clearly a focus for both the Children's Equity Project and the Council. How would you define equity within the ECE space, and why is it so important?
This is a great question. So in 2020, we published a paper. Actually, the Council was a part of that paper that really identified 14 priorities to advance equity in early care education. And that document, we used a conceptualization of equitable systems and what it means to build an equitable system for early care education. And we kind of used that as the overarching frame for a lot of our work. And the main dimensions of that conceptualization was that a framework that we call access, experiences, and equitable system. And so we think of an equitable system as one that has equitable access. So who has access, who gets in the door, who doesn't get in the door, for who is it really easy to get in the door, for who is it really hard and have to go over barriers, right? Like what is access just to get into programs, services, access to resources, etc. What does that look like? The second piece is experience. So once kids and families are receiving services, once they're in our programs, once they're in our classrooms or early childhood homes, what are their experiences, right? And we pay particular attention to the experiences that we know, based on research and data, disproportionately affect kids from historically marginalized communities. We think about issues like, what does the discipline look like in the classroom, and what does harsh discipline look like? Because we know that Black children, children with disabilities, and boys are overly disciplined. They're disproportionately disciplined and receive harsh discipline, even though we know that they don't have worse behavior, they don't have more misbehaviors, right? And so what is the language of instruction, for example, is another key issue, which we know disproportionately impacts dual language learners who may not walk in the door with as much English exposure or any English exposure compared to their peers. What do accommodations and services look like for kids with disabilities, right? Are we implementing inclusive practices, which of course disproportionately impacts our kids with disabilities? So really thinking about the experiences that kids have once they are in our doors, in our care, in our systems, and what that looks like. And the third piece is outcomes. So what are the outcomes of these investments, of these programs, of these services, right? And how do those outcomes differ for different groups of kids? So that we could better understand, okay, if we have disparities in outcomes, whether those are pre-academic, whether those are fill in the blank, we can trace it back to how we can make those experiences better and what that access looks like for folks. So really thinking about access, experiences, and outcomes, where outcomes should be positive outcomes for all kids that are not associated with their demographic characteristics. Outcomes should not line up with your race or the color of your skin, with your zip code, with the language you speak at home, and so on. And so really looking at those three dimensions is how we think about conceptualizing equity.
Oh, that's great. And considering what you just said, when you were working with the team and we're going through the second edition of Essentials, what were the areas that you wanted to focus on when updating the new third edition with all of that in mind?
We really, because Essentials, right, it's so practice-based, right? It's about what is happening, those interactions that are happening in early childhood programs. We really focused in on the experiences part, right, of the framework that I just mentioned. And so a lot of the examples that I just referenced a minute ago were pieces that we really tried to focus on, unpack a little bit more, get into more detail, provide more concrete direction within Essentials. And so some of those areas were inclusion and accessibility for children with disabilities, thinking about the intersection of race, disability, and language, and what that means for practice, thinking about dual language learners and what are key kind of instructional practices and how we can build relationships when there is a mismatch in language between the provider and the child or the family, how we can embed bilingual learning opportunities for DLLs. We thought a lot about racial equity and what that looks like in the classroom, including how do we promote positive racial socialization and engage in practices where kids are proud of who they are. They're proud of their culture, they're proud of their families, they're proud of who they are and what they look like and what they're bringing and all of the things that they're bringing to the classroom. So really focused on that and really focused on understanding bias and all of the ways that data tell us that it unfolds. And so what are some strategies and what are some approaches and how do we raise awareness of understanding bias, of understanding what it shows up as and how it looks within the classroom so that we can be aware and that we always talk about preventing bias from manifesting into harmful actions or behaviors or words, right? With that awareness and actions kind of in between. We worked a lot on family engagement and family partnerships and ensuring there's kind of, a co-leadership and equal partnerships between families and providers. That was another area that we did some work on.
Well, that's very helpful. And, thinking of what you said about biases and awareness, it can be scary and daunting to look at your materials through the equity lens, especially as a new organization. How should other organizations think about doing that? And what are the steps for beginning those types of projects?
I think the first thing that I'd say, I think especially in the equity space, too often we're afraid to talk about it first. It's a sensitive subject. It's a triggering subject for different reasons for different folks. So talking about it is an important first step. But also too often we stop after just talking about it, right? And action and change needs to follow those words in order to actually make progress and build more fair, more quality, more equitable systems for kids and families. And so the first piece, right, is act. I think one of the things that we try to do at the Children's Equity Project is we're always trying to identify inequities in our system, identify where those disparities are in outcomes, identify where there is inequitable access, or where there are differences in experiences that are happening for various groups of kids, as I mentioned, historically marginalized communities, Black children, Indigenous children, Latina children, children with disabilities, and so forth. So I think really being able to start identifying where something's happening that isn't fair, where we have disparities that we can trace back to experiences or access, and always trying to identify those pieces and acting on changing where we see things that aren't working. The other thing I'd say is start with your foundational documents, right? What are some core foundational documents of your organization that really serve as a guide or a framework for the rest of your work? Often organizations have those, and start there, right? Because then that would feed into a lot of the other work. So with the council, we were so excited and lucky to partner with them on not only implementing and embedding equity more deeply in essentials, but also looking at the core competencies and embedding recommendations and equity greater in that, which is to come. And so those are two really important foundational documents that feed into and branch out to other work, right? And so really starting at those core documents that serve as framing for everything else is important.
Well, I really appreciate that feedback. And I'm sure so many people will find that helpful. And, kind of jumping off of that, why is it important now more than ever for organizations to have equity as a content strategy piece?
Yeah, I don't, it's always been important. I feel like, and of course it's always been important. Certainly the pandemic has exacerbated existing inequities that have been there since before the founding of the nation and that have been typical of the systems in which we operate for a long time. I would say, though, that what's different now, perhaps in the last few years, we just know more, right? The science has evolved, the research has evolved. We have better data in some places, not so good in other places, but we know more. We know more about best practices and instructional strategies and pedagogy to support dual language learners in their bilingual development. We know for a fact, right, that by high quality dual language immersion and bilingual development is the preferred and more optimal approach for dual language learners, right? We had decades of what folks call the language wars when we're arguing over English only or bilingual education. And now we know, right? It's embedding that home language and growing the home language, and we know that bilingualism is a good thing, right? So there's more we know. There's more we know about the inclusion of kids with disabilities and how to do that correctly. There's a lot more we know about bias and how it manifests, right? There are different ways that it unfolds for different issues. It shows up in the expectations we have for kids, in the praise that we're giving to kids or not giving to kids, in harsh discipline, as we've already talked about. It shows up in the relationships we build with families and how those might look different, right? And so there's a lot more we know on that and about the ways that manifests so that we can address it. We don't have an excuse to act, right? Like we know better. We have known better. We have known that all of these issues are issues and have been for a long time. And I guess the last thing I'd say is, of course, that we have a growing diversity in the nation. We know that most children are children of color in the United States now, especially the younger part of the trajectory in children. And so if our systems aren't working for some kids, they're not working at all, in my opinion. And so, yes, it's more important, or perhaps it's critical now, but it always has been critical. We just know more and have kind of the knowledge and skills across communities and the country to embed better practices.
Thank you for that. I mean, definitely, it's always been important, but bringing it to the forefront of the conversation is also important now as we think about the pandemic and what's to come. So I really appreciate that answer. And I also appreciate your participation today and your critical role in developing the new essentials. I know so many people are going to be excited to read it if they are not already. And knowing one of the faces behind it will definitely make it even more exciting. So thank you again. If you have anything else, we would love to hear it as we think about the future.
Yeah, no, I think the only thing I'd say is I want to give credit and huge appreciation to the folks who worked with me closely in modifying and updating and embedding equity into both essentials and the competencies, including Dr. Carol Brunson-Day, Dr. Rosemary Allen, Dr. Sigrid Soto-Boykin, Dr. Dariel Blevins, and as well as a broader group of experts who participated in supporting the development and the updating of the work. So hugely in debt to all of those folks for the amazing work and thought partnership across the project. And last, but of course not least, maybe first, just thank Dr. Moore for his incredible leadership in all of this work, for even coming up with the idea and partnering with us to really ensure and show his commitment to equity and to moving the field forward. You know, the CDA is a huge part of the early care and education field and system, and starting there and embedding equity as the foundation to our workforce knowledge competencies is a huge step forward, and that took a lot of leadership from him. So a huge thank you to him and the council as well.
Awesome. Well, we're about to hear from him next, and I really appreciate, you calling out the people that participated. It was a huge project, and they should all be recognized. And thank you again for the Children's Equity Project role in creating the Essentials Third Edition.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
It was wonderful having you today, and we look forward to having you again soon.
All right. Take care now. Bye-bye.
Our next guest is Dr. Calvin E. Moore Jr., CEO for the Council for Professional Recognition. As a former CDA educator and huge advocate for more male representation in the ECE classroom, Dr. Moore's passion for equity and inclusion exudes in how he serves the Council and beyond. Today, Dr. Moore will share why the Council thought it was important to view essentials through an equity lens and how educators can pursue equity beyond the textbook in the classroom. Welcome, Dr. Moore.
Thank you, Kate. It's really a pleasure to be with you to talk about this wonderful publication.
Well, some of our viewers may not be familiar with the Council. What is our mission and how are we serving early childhood educators?
As you know, the mission of the Council is to promote the improved performance and recognition of early childhood professionals working with young children ages birth to age 5. One of the things that we are most proud of is administering the Child Development Associate Credential. It was established in 1971, and the purpose of the program is to enhance the quality of early childhood education by defining, evaluating, and recognizing the competence of early educators. The CDA credential has been administered by the Council since 1985, so we have a long history of promoting quality, competence, and the work that early childhood professionals are doing every day.
Wonderful. Thank you for that overview. Dr. Meek shared her insight earlier, but we'd love to hear your take as well. How would you define equity within the ECE space, and why is it so important?
That's really an interesting question. I think if you want to approach early childhood education through the lens of equity, you have to acknowledge that there has been disenfranchisement and discrimination faced by children and families and teachers. And we have to create schools and systems that sort of eradicate those barriers so that children and families can succeed, that we can empower them to do more and inspire them to create a more just society. But we also have to think about how we want to advance equity. And the Council has long promoted the Advancing Equity Early Childhood Education position statement by NAEYC. And that position statement really says clearly that all children have a right to equitable learning opportunities that help them achieve their full potential. And the council has really embraced that through our national CDA standards. We want to support teachers as they create these equitable learning opportunities.
Right. And, equity has been the essence of Essential since its first release in 1991. And with each edition, we continue to do a deeper dive to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion. So, why is it important to view Essentials through an equity lens?
I think you're right, Kate. We've been involved in this equity conversation through our publication for many, many years. And we have sort of grown as more research and information around this important topic has come to bear on our field. And that's why the um, partnership with Dr. Meek and the Children's Equity Project was so important. And so in 2020, I wanted to partner with her to do an equity-focused review of the essentials before we launched this new edition to make sure that the latest information around this topic is included in this edition. If you remember, Kate, at the time, the country was grappling with this issue as well. A lot of social injustices and upheaval had happened across the country. And I think it was a wonderful time to really look at the messages and the approaches and even some of the materials that we were highlighting in Essentials to make sure that early childhood education was really on the cutting edge where equity was concerned.
Definitely. It's hard to forget that time, and I really appreciate such a thoughtful answer. It's one thing to read and learn from essentials, but how do we pursue equity beyond the textbook in the classroom?
Equity education systems really demand culturally responsive teaching. It demands developmentally appropriate practices. It also demands that teachers make accommodations to meet students' needs, and the voice of families, educators, and children should be highlighted through our policy development work. But more importantly, we should raise our voices at the council to really showcase what our thinking is around equity and how we can sort of leverage our place in the field to do more. One example of that is the focus that we primarily placed on the workplace issues that early childhood educators face every day, whether it's around better pay and benefits, but also having a more diverse field, which is why I've spoken on men in the ECE field for many years and sort of highlighted the importance of bringing more men into the field. It's also important that we use our levers to advance a more equitable pipeline into the field. And I believe we should start early. That's why the high school CDA program is so important, where we can showcase and share the merits and the importance of early childhood education with young people who are in high school so that when they graduate, they leave high school with the CDA along with their high school diploma, and they are work ready. They could start on day one as an early childhood professional.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, I know that that's a great opportunity for a lot of people coming out of high school to, have an employment opportunity like that. So it's great that the high school CDA program is growing. The pandemic, you mentioned during 2020, the pandemic created so many buzzwords that were used ad nauseum by organizations. I think we'd all struggle to forget how often unprecedented, new normal, pivot were used during the moments we were shut down. So, how do we prevent terms like diversity, equity, and inclusion from becoming buzzwords in ECE?
That's a great question. I remember I've been in the field for over 30 years. And so I remember how these buzzwords would emerge every now and then. But I think it's important if the work becomes part of your DNA as an organization, then it's less of a buzzword, but it's more about advancing the work. And so I think that we have to be really laser focused on making sure that this work shows up in our policies, our standard operating procedures, the way in which we work with each other every day. so that we can espouse the tenets of equity throughout everything that we do. And that's what we really want for people who are using essentials in classrooms to train and teach early professionals through their teacher preparation programs. You will see that equity is almost on every page of the essentials, and using it to make sure that it's part of teachers' DNA, I think is really critically important. That as they make these decisions in classrooms, that they're thinking about, how do we build and advance equity with this group of children that I'm serving every day and with these families, so that they can really create the kind of society that we want? Because after all, the children are our future, and we want to make sure that we start early, even in early childhood programs, really thinking about how we can help children get along with each other, how we can help them understand the diverse communities where they live, and how we can make them the best citizens of our country that they can be.
Oh, great answer. Thank you so much for that. And it's been wonderful getting your take, especially coming after Dr. Meek's deep dive into the process and the research. So I really appreciate your time. Is there anything else you'd like to share with our viewers while we're here for Essentials?
No, I'd just like to thank Dr. Meek for the work that she and her team did in partnering with us to make sure that this latest edition of Essentials is the best resource that we can put forward in the early childhood sector. And I'm really proud of the work that we did together. And I look forward to other opportunities to work with Dr. Meek and the Children's Equity Project in the future. And thank you, Kate, for this opportunity to speak on how important equity is in early childhood.
Well, it was so wonderful to have you both, and I hope this was helpful for our viewers. It was honestly helpful for me working at the council, so I can only imagine the people who are watching. Thank you again.
Thank you. We'll talk soon.